Welcome to Pro Talk with the Mighty Oba. We are here today to talk about a very important subject with my good friend, Dr. Earl Ofari Hutchinson. Dr. Hutchinson is a nationally acclaimed author and commentator on many social issues. He is seen on various national networks and is one of the most sought after speakers in this country. He is my good friend, and he is from the town, I say the town, but it's one of the greatest cities on the planet, Los Angeles, California. He is an author of more than 25 books, and he is my good friend for a number of years. I would like for everyone to say hello to Dr. Earl Ofari Hutchinson. How you doing, Doc?
You know, not only am I doing well, but gee, after that introduction, we need to tell our listeners and viewers, you and I, we go back a long way, and it's been a I'm not trying to date ourselves now, but you know what I mean.
Yes, sir.
And it's been a great relationship, and I'm happy to be back with you again. Love it.
Well, you know, I've got your back. I enjoy what you have done for a number of years. I salute the LA Roundtable as they continue to influence urban policy, not only in the Los Angeles area, but around the country. You're doing an excellent job with that, and I'm sure that many people of your family are very proud of the vision that you saw with that. I did speak with Carrie O'Horn yesterday. And,
I was thinking about her.
That's another subject we're going to have to talk a little bit more off the air, but she did send you her regards.
Good. I'm glad she's doing well.
All right. Well, Doc, today we're going to talk about a subject that I think so many people are either evading, they don't want to talk about it, but race in professional sports is a subject that needs to be talked about, and it continues to be a factor in professional sports. Why is that?
Well, I think for two reasons. One, let's start with the history. When you look at professional sport, we know that in Major League Baseball, we know that in the National Football League, and to an extent in the early years in the National Basketball Association, and to a great extent today in the National Hockey League, we know that African Americans or people of color of African ancestry have been excluded. We know Major League Baseball, that's been well documented, the color bar that was well in place for decades and decades. Same with the National Football League. The NBA a little bit looser, only because it had kind of a barnyard sport kind of reputation early on. National Hockey League, as we well know, it's been a great problem there in terms of people of color, especially African Americans, breaking into the league, even today. So you've got that history that you're bumping up against. And I have to remind people, Oba, when you really look at it, you know, in the span of time that African Americans have entered and played an integral part in professional sports, it's been relatively a very short period of time. We're only talking about 40 or 50 years, really.
Yes.
And really in Major League Baseball, only the latter part, remember the latter part of the 1950s and into the 1960s, and you still had in the 60s and even going into the 70s, the Boston Red Sox, teams in Washington that still had a problem with African Americans. So, you know, you've got the history of racism, first of all. Second thing, Oba, our passion, you and I, we share a great passion with the National Football League,
Yes.
Professional football. You know, even today, when you look in, before we went on the air, the listeners and viewers didn't hear our conversation. We were talking about Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills.
Yes.
But you know as well as I do, and I think that's a good point that I'm going to make to use him. I think you said that he's still got an accuracy problem. There's still some other issues about handling the ball, taking care of the ball.
Yes.
You know, for decades, Oba, African American quarterbacks in the NFL were non-existent.
Yes.
And then when they began to make their entrance in with a number of professional teams, there was still the great knock about, well, do they have the intelligence? Well, can they pass the ball? Well, are they just running backs? Well, can we change them to another position? You know, well. And I brought up Allen for another reason. You know as well as I do, perhaps even today, even as we speak now, if a Josh Allen was an African American at quarterback, I'm not so sure that he would be given the latitude to basically fumble and bumble around that, say, a white quarterback would have. So there's still a double standard there that even African American players in the major league, all the sports are still graded by. You got to be better. You have to be better than the others. Oba, I remember something. I just got to say this.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle, who actually introduced me decades ago to professional football. As a high schooler, he would take me to, back then, before the Rams moved back to L.A. You know, they were in L.A. for decades before they moved to St. Louis.
Right.
He would take me to the Coliseum, and I have fond memories of a Sunday at the Coliseum with him. I'm a 15, 16-year-old. I never will forget something that he said about, at that time, James Harris was just making his entrance, first black quarterback with the Rams. He was getting booed all over the place. I mean, it was really touch and go with him. My uncle said something I never forgot about blacks in sport. In this case, the quarterback, but it could apply across the board. He said they would rather, they being the LA Rams, but it applied to any team, they would rather lose with a lousy white quarterback than win with a great black quarterback. I never forgot that. In other words, the double standard.
Yes. And, you know, we're going to talk more about quarterbacks as things go on in this interview, because it is a very, very sensitive subject that I think needs your expertise. I think you give some of the best commentary on that area that I have ever heard. So we're definitely going to talk more about that. Doc, the athletic field is supposed to be based on athletic ability. How did personal prejudices emerge in sport or in athletics, especially professional sports? And as you mentioned, the position of quarterback, but also the position of middle linebacker. We've seen that on the defensive side of the ball. How did that happen?
Also center, too.
Also center, yes.
Well, you know, Oba, I think you've got attitudes, too. You got a mindset. I didn't, you know, that had history I talked about 50, 60 years ago is still very much with us, that legacy. You know, you just don't abandon that, even with the march of time. Yeah, things have changed. Yeah, there's a different, among some, ethic about how African-American athletes in professional sport are viewed. But at the end of the day, you got to remember the key is professional. The key is it's a money sport. We're not talking about college. We're not talking about high school, so-called amateur sports. We're talking about sport that's driven by the dollar. Certainly in this country and globally, whatever the marketing will bear in other countries. So there's always one eye on the field or the arena or the court, and there's another big eye, maybe two eyes, on the box office. So the thinking is, look, if we have, remember for many years in professional basketball, we couldn't have too many blacks on the court at one time because, you know, the fans aren't going to buy it. It came up again, Oba, with Kaepernick.
Yes.
When Kaepernick took the knee, remember you had some owners that may have actually wanted Kaepernick, but then they had to think about the fans. I mean, will they accept him? You know, are they going to boycott us? Are they going to turn off to us with their dollars? Are advertisers going to have a problem with that? So all of these things came into play. I don't think you can separate any conversation about the African American or African Americans in professional sport from the business of sport. It's a business, first of all.
Yes.
And I think owners, they understand that. Yeah. You know, if you got a quarterback like a Dak Prescott that's performing, or Russell Wilson that's performing, or, you know, Patrick Mahomes that's performing, I mean, transcendental, you know, athletes, they're good for the box office. But the real test is what happens when they slip. That's when you really begin to see in the real test about the position of African Americans in any professional sport. Always keep in mind it's a business first, it's approached that way. The second thing, you mentioned prejudices. There are many coaches that like to think of themselves as very enlightened, think of themselves as very progressive and forward-looking, but they're not. They still have certain prejudices they bring about African American players. Essentially, that they're brawny, they're muscular, they're physical, you know, all the ancient stereotypes about them, except one thing, Oba, can they think?
Yes.
Can they really handle positions that require a thought process? So you still have some lingering prejudices about that. And it's reflected in some of the positions that you see African Americans in, especially in the National Football League.
Mm. The creation of the Rooney Rule, Doc, forced NFL teams and other sports to interview a minimum number of candidates of color for front office and coaching positions. Has it worked?
Well, yes and no. I was very optimistic for a while. First of all, let's talk about the Rooney Rule first. Many may not know what that is. The Rooney Rule, essentially, the late owner, of course, of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Art Rooney, essentially had a conscience, and he said, "Look, the National Football League now is about 70 to 75%, maybe 80% African American. We got a problem with the front office. We got a problem with the coaching staff, and especially the head coaching position." So the thinking went, okay, he sold the idea to the NFL, the commissioner and the rest of the owners, that if you have a team and there's a vacancy at the head coaching position, before you hire the good old boy network, which always kicks in professional sport, before you go there with that, i.e. another white retread coach, you're going to have to go out and interview 1, 2, or 3, some African Americans. Give them at least a hearing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, after that, you hire who you want. But at least you've gone through the protocol. And I thought that was a good rule. And, it took a while to get that, to get that in place. And I said Rooney, but I mean, there was pressure, as you well know, from a lot of the ex-players, particularly those that had formed associations of former African-American players. Okay, so, Oba, I thought for a brief period, there were, going back 2 years, it was working fairly well. You had at one point 7 or 8 African American coaches.
Right.
I thought it was pretty good in the NFL with 32 teams. And so I thought it was pretty good at that point, fairly representative. And then, too, when you work back over from the head coaching positions, we certainly saw a number of African Americans in the pipeline, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, backs coach, which, by the way, Oba, as you and I well know, that's the pipeline.
Right.
Into the good old boy system, i.e. head coach.
Right.
Okay, so I thought it was a good thing, but I've seen, Oba, in the last year or two, some backsliding.
Yes.
Number of African-American coaches, a number of that 7 or 8, they're gone. And again, I'm not going to get into the debate about the teams, their ability, what they did, their performance. I'm not going to grade them as coaches. Just simply to say, in relation to your question, the numbers are down. Now, what does that mean? It simply means that if the Rooney Rule is going to have any meaning whatsoever, we're going to have to, the NFL is going to have to return again to essentially the commitment it made when it had the wind behind it those 3 or 4 years ago and brought a number of African Americans in.
Right.
It's going to have to reposition itself again. You've got a great pipeline that you've already used, a number of African Americans that have shown they can produce at the sub-head coach level. And they're going to have to be given a fair shot. Their names are going to have to be there, routinely mentioned. And team owners are going to have to take it, and general managers are going to have to take it seriously about hiring them. One other thing, Oba, I think it's important, too, in the conversation about the Rooney Rule and head coaches, don't forget general managers, too.
Yes.
They play an inordinate, outsized role in making decisions about head coaching, hires, and decisions. Last time I looked, we're losing black African-American GMs, too.
Yes.
There was a period we had 4 or 5. Now I think we're down, is it 1 or 2? I'm not sure.
Right. When coaches of color, Doc, are even given the opportunity in the NFL, why do they rarely get a second? And we see this happen a lot this year. Adam Gase fired from the Dolphins, immediately hired by the New York Jets. Leslie Frazier, defensive coordinator for the Bills, has a top 5 defense 2 years in a row, has a top 5 defense this year. He hasn't had another interview yet. Perry Fewell, a former interim coach for the Buffalo Bills and defensive coordinator with the Giants, won a Super Bowl. He's not being even given an opportunity of interviews. Why is that, Doc?
All right, well, okay, Oba, it goes back to what we were saying, a few minutes ago. It's a double standard. In other words, I have to go back again to what my beloved uncle said. They'd rather lose with a bad white quarterback than win with a superb black quarterback. Why would you think that's any different when it comes to coaching positions?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly. They would rather lose. You mentioned Adam Gase. I mean, the Jets are now 1-6. I mean, come on, they look totally chaotic against the Patriots the other night. Not to say that any other team wouldn't, but they just didn't perform. So the fact of the matter is, they're giving and Adam Gase and others are given second and third and fourth chances. When you talk about a Leslie Frazier, when you talk about a Lovie Smith, when you talk about guys like that, no, they only have one shot. Either they make it, and I mean continue to make it, not just have one winning season, but they have to be consistent winners. Right. If that's not the case, they're out. And once they're out, they're not automatically thought of like, say, an Adam Gase, where we'll go pick you up right away. No, it's not going to happen. Again, we're looking at a very, very entrenched double standard. Going back in the NFL, and by the way, I might add, not just NFL, but also Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
And the only reason you don't see it in the NBA, because basically it's a black sport.
Right, right.
But my guess is, if it wasn't, if you still had the same margins within the NBA, you'd see the same pattern there.
Doc, why don't they get the opportunity to build a team? You mentioned Lovie Smith. He was in the process of building the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, drafts his franchise quarterback, and in the process, he's replaced. Same thing with Vance Joseph in Denver. He wasn't even given the right quarterback, and he's shown the door immediately. Why is that?
Okay, well, partly because of the owners, the mindset, which we talked a little bit about, the double standard. I think the other thing, too, let me circle back on something, Oba. In the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, Major League Baseball, never forget the majority, the overwhelming majority of the fans. It may be a lot of African Americans on the teams. The majority of the fans are white. I attend the Ram games, usually one or two every year. They're back in LA, obviously. One or two every year, and I'm always struck by at the Coliseum sitting there. Now you're talking about Los Angeles, you can't get more of a multicultural city than
Right.
Los Angeles.
Right.
But yet and still, the majority of the fans there are still white, and not just white. We're not talking about working class whites. We're talking about middle income, upper class whites. Why? First of all, the price of the tickets. You're not talking about $10 and $20 seats. I mean, you're talking about $200-$300, even higher than that.
Right.
And so right away, pricing is a factor. The other thing is the nature of the sport too. Historically, football and baseball, and even before blacks made the big entrance in basketball, but even now, it's been seen from a fan standpoint as their form of entertainment. So the fact of the matter is that when you have the majority of the fans there that are non-black and upper, I might add too, class too, the majority of them have some income and means. The other thing, and many of them are very conservative too, especially in football. The other thing too, sponsors and advertisers, they have to take note of that. They're not going to offend anyone. They're certainly not going to offend the fan base.
Right.
So again, it's a combination. The fans, what they want, their tastes and desires and their prejudices, advertisers who have to be satisfied, and the mindset of the owners too, and GMs.
Understood, Doc. We're talking to Dr. Earl Ofari Hutchinson about race in professional sports with a heavy emphasis on the National Football League since it is football season. And Doc, you said something about the position of quarterback. We're seeing a quarterback that came out of the same class with Josh Allen, speaking of Lamar Jackson, who was told to become a wide receiver by various so-called NFL experts, but he ends up being the most successful quarterback of that class, and he was the last one taken in the first round by Ozzie Newsome of the Baltimore Ravens.
There's a little backstory to that too, Oba, before we even get to Jackson, Newsome, the Ravens, and what the Boo Birds have had to say about him. Jackson's mother stepped in when he was at Louisville. The coaches there and I'm sure you're aware of this, Ova, the coaches there wanted to move him to wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
They did not want him to play quarterback. and Jackson's mother said, no, my son, talk about a smart mom, my son plays quarterback or he goes to another school. So the rest is history at Louisville. Heisman Trophy, and of course, very, very successful there. Now he gets to the NFL. The big knock against him, like so many, here we go with the double standard again, against African Americans coming into the quarterback position, no matter how well they have played in college, Division I might add. Well, can they pass? Can they think?
Right.
Can they make the adjustments? Are they just running backs? In other words, the brute savage image of African Americans, all brawn, no brain, and no technical skills. Or Oba, the ability to acquire those skills. Look, when you go into pro ball, we happen to be talking about quarterback, but any position, in any professional sport, you've got trainers, you've got coaches, you've got all kinds of experts that are there to work with you at those positions, sharpen your skills,
yes.
Refine, hone. That's what they're there for. That's what they're being paid for, and these are some of the best in the business. So essentially, when a Jackson goes to the Baltimore Ravens, right away, the thinking was many fans didn't want to see that. They said, no, it's not going to happen. He's not going to be the quarterback of the future. He's just a running back that happens to be under center. But the fact of the matter is, something has happened with Baltimore so far. What's happened is that he's made a believer. The old thing is, on the surface anyway, there's nothing like success but success.
Yes.
So far, they're winning. He's looked good. Passing average is very good. But, I still think, though, this. Despite now, there's some talk now about the narrative. He's part of the narrative now for MVP. We're hearing that now. My guess, though, Oba, let him have a bad game or two. All you're going to hear, once again, unlike Josh Allen, you're going to hear, well, Jackson, we knew it all along. Maybe he wasn't quite suited for this, yada, yada, yada. Again, even in success, African Americans still have to be 50 times better and keep that success going.
Doc, do many teams just do not want a person of color as the face of their organization at the position of quarterback?
Well, I think a person of color in any position, and I'll tell you why, because we have to go back again, it's a business. It's a big money business. The NFL, since we focused on that for a minute, but it applies to a lesser degree with the other sport. The NFL is perhaps the most successful from a business standpoint, corporate business standpoint, enterprise on the planet, second to none. So as a result of that, it's a dollar sport. There's
yes.
no getting around that. So now you ask the question, well, wait a minute. Can't we have an African American in a sport or in a league and a sport that is based so much on the dollar, so much on corporate sponsorship, so much on fans that happen to not be African American? I just don't think that's realistic from an owner standpoint. They don't see it that way. I mean, in theory, yes, you could have that. But on the other hand, no, because they're always looking over their shoulder at, is it good for business? Not necessarily for sport.
What about the position of middle linebacker, Doc? Why was that such I guess that's the quarterback of the defense, but why is that such a position on a football team in the National Football League that, the same prejudices occurred in that area too before the Willie Lanier's, the Singletaries of the world came in and were so successful?
Well, and also let's throw in center too on the offensive line. Middle linebacker and center.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, just the definition of what they are. Center and middle linebacker, they are right there. They control the flow. They control the flow. Center on the offensive line, the blocking adjustments. First of all, getting the ball back to the quarterback, putting it in his hands. And then, of course, middle linebacker, invariably, they call the signal, defensive signals. Make the adjustments, move players around, have to second guess and anticipate, what the offense is going to do. So it's a mind game. It's not just a physical game. It's a mind game, too. So, again, the prejudice being that African Americans at middle linebacker and center, they're just too dumb. They're just too dumb. They don't have the brains. They can't think. They're not going to be able to make those complex adjustments that, say, a white guy at center and or middle linebacker could make. So once again, we come full circle back to, is it about brawn versus brain, or just brawn with African Americans and how they see them? You know, the other thing, too, let's think about, as I'm thinking about it, throwing wide receiver, too. For decades, what did we hear? And even now, Oba, yeah, and you see this because you're at the Buffalo Bill games calling them, and I'm out here all the time monitoring, you know, what announcers in the booths are saying. If you had a nickel, Oba, and I had a nickel, every time you heard an announcer say about a black wide receiver, he's a speed burner. If you had a nickel for that, we'd own our rating. We'd own the National Football League team. But how often, Oba, do you hear a announcer say about that same wide receiver, forget the speed burner, forget he's a burner. How often do you hear him say, gee, he runs such precise routes. Gee, he is meticulous in his route running. How often do you hear that? No, you know, occasionally you do. You know, fair is fair. But more likely than not, you're going to hear brawn versus brain. Because when they say a meticulous route runner, that suggests to me you've got someone who can think, who can plan, who essentially moves in such a way that there's a thought process there, as opposed to just running down the field. Pure brute strength.
We're here on Pro Talk with Dr. Earl Ofari Hutchinson, talking about race in professional sports. Here on Pro Talk with the Mighty Oba, this is one of the discussions that I wanted to get in before the holiday season with, I think, one of the best commentators that we have in the nation, Dr. Earl Ofari Hutchinson. He is the author of more than 25 books. He is also his own talk show host. Tell us about your radio show that people can catch up with you on Facebook and different social mediums, Doc.
Well, actually, two radio shows. I do the Sharpton Show on Monday and out in L.A. on the Pacifica Network. Radio station KPFK 90.7. The beauty of the internet now, as you well know, Oba, I don't care if you're on the moon, you can hear my show.
That's right.
We live stream it on Facebook, Earl Ofari Hutchinson on Facebook, and we have our internet stream, kpfk.org. So basically, there's a lot of ways to come at it, and we do a podcast.